Today we're going to talk about the 25 books I need to read in 2025. All those books are on my physical TBR because I'm planning to do a low/no buy year next year when it comes to book. I'm still figuring out the specifics and the exceptions that I will allow myself. I'll make a video about it if you're curious. But so that means that next year I will not be purchasing a lot of books at all. And so I want to focus on the books that are already on my shelves. I think I have quite a good split. I have some literary fiction, a bunch of fantasy and sci-fi, and some nonfiction. I think I have 10 nonfiction for 15 fiction books. So without further ado, let's look at them. Starting with nonfiction, I have 2 books on the theme of music. It's This Is What It Sounds Like by Susan Rogers and Ogie Ogas, and In Good Hands by Alice Farnham. The first one is about why we love the music that we love and how patterns in songs or features of certain songs make us love them and want to listen to them over and over again. And the second one is about the art of conducting. I know nothing about this topic and I'm very excited to dive into it and learn more about it. Then I have a few books around the topic of managing your energy, taking care of yourself, and fighting against burnout. The first one is Pace Yourself by Amy Arthur. It was on my TBR back in June, I think, and I didn't get to it. I had started listening to it on audiobook and was really enjoying it, but felt like I needed a physical copy to make sure that I was extracting the learnings from it. So I'm hoping to get to it in 2025 finally. Then we have Laziness Does Not Exist by Devon Price. It's from the same author of Unmasking Autism, which I'm hoping to read in December. And I've heard very good things about Unmasking Autism, so I'm expecting this one to be as good. And then the third book on this similar overarching theme is The Cure for Burnout by Emily Ballesteros. Next on my list are 2 books about the creative process. The first one is a French book from Christelle Dabos, who is the author of the Mirror Visitor series. I reread A Winter's Promise recently and absolutely loved it. It's one of my favorite series, and so I'm very curious to read this little nonfiction book about her writing process and her advice to other aspiring authors. And then the second one is Walking in This World by Julia Cameron, who is also the author of the very famous The Artist Way. I did the Artist Way program at the end of 2023 and then also did the Write for Life program later in the year. I have a whole video series about this that you can check out if you're interested. The Artist Way, if you're not familiar, is a 12-week program to help you reconnect yourself with your creativity and unlock your creative potential. Some key exercises from the program and quite famous in creative circles are the morning pages, where you write 3 pages of longhand writing, just dumping everything that's in your mind to free up your brain and unlock your creativity. And the other one is the artist date, where you take yourself on a creative activity for 2 hours just by yourself. As I mentioned, I did this program at the end of last year, and I have some critiques of Julia Cameron's books, but overall, I still have to admit that this book helped change my life in the sense that it got me back into writing. And it's been a source of joy and connection for me this year. So for that, I'm extremely grateful to those books. Walking in This World is apparently a sequel to The Artist's Way, so it's also a 12-week program. I'm expecting that there will be a requirement to do the morning pages, to do artist dates, and then other exercises along the way. I would like to do this in 2025 to continue the good habits I've taken around my writing and creative practice, and to hopefully deepen it and help me go further along my writing journey. So I'm curious to see how this one is like and if it brings anything new or different to the previous books. Then I have two random pieces of nonfiction that I'm curious to read. The first one is Platypus by Anne Moyal, and the platypus is one of, if not my favorite animal. I think it's so intriguing and so unique, and it was also a key character in one of my childhood's favorite stories. So I'm very curious to learn more about the species and the history around how it was discovered. The next one is a French book. I think it's translated from the German, if I'm not mistaken. Yes, so it's The Patriarchy of Objects would be the English title, from Rebecca Endler, and it's translated from German by Elisabeth Amirain-Fossler. And it talks about how a lot of day-to-day objects and items in our daily lives are designed for men and how that impacts women. So I'm quite interested to read this, and I think it probably is gonna make me a bit angry of how patriarchy is seeping in so many apparently innocuous things, but how it actually impacts women again on their day-to-day lives. So I think it's going to be quite an interesting read, and I'm looking forward to it. Then I have a small categories for books in other languages. The first one is Us by Sara Soler. It's a graphic novel that I have in Spanish. It's the story of a young couple of which one is transitioning. So I'm quite curious to read about this story, and I think it's going to be quite a moving and cute one for 2025. Then I have short stories in Italian by Olly Richards. I would like to try learning Italian in 2025. I think it's probably ambitious because I have a lot of hobbies that I want to make time for, but I don't know, there is something driving me toward Italian. And so I got this little book when I was in Milan in November, and I think it's going to be a good tool for me to get started with Italian. So we'll see how it goes. I'll give it a try. The next category is contemporary/literary fiction. I have 6 books in there, so the categories are starting to grow. The first one is How Cupid Breaks Your Heart by Florentina Leo. This is the story of how the end of a friendship can break your heart, and it's set in Kyoto. So the combination of the two makes me very excited about reading this. It's also a fairly short one, so I don't think it would take too much time for me to get through it. Then I would like to get to Sorrow and Bliss by Meg Mason. It was a book that I was already quite intrigued by for November, the event I hosted in November to encourage people to read more about neurodivergence and also about how the mind and the brain works. This story is very much centered around mental health, but I think there is also some neurodivergence representation in it. And I've heard mixed things about it, but I'm still quite curious to experience it for myself. So we will see what I think about it. Then I really want to read Pod by Layleen Paul. I read this year her previous novel, which is called The Bees, set in a beehive, and it was so fascinating and so unique. And so this one is telling the story of a pod of dolphins. I love marine mammals. I wanted to study them when I was a kid. And I also had the chance to live that dream for a very short time, just a few weeks when I was in Australia. I'm just fascinated by marine mammals and dolphins in particular, so I'm super excited for this book. I think the cover is probably not doing it justice, but again, if that book is as good as The Bees, I think it's going to be an amazing read, and I can't wait to get to it in 2025. Next is The Hearing Test by Eliza Barry Callahan. This is a book I picked up during my trip in London in August, and it's the story of a main character who wakes up one day losing her hearing. I'm very intrigued and curious to read about senses lost. I recently read The Mind's Eye by Oliver Sacks about people losing some visual abilities. It was usually neurological, not like a physical or biological dysfunction, but it was very interesting and a bit scary as well, to be honest. But it was about different conditions like Alexia, the inability to read, which sounds absolutely terrible, like my worst nightmare, or the ability to recognize faces or to just recognize objects in general. Again, it was very interesting and I really enjoyed learning more about this. I have on my wish list a book about the loss of smell as well, and so this is a novel, but I would be very keen to see the experience of that character losing her hearing sense as well. I think it also pairs quite well with my nonfiction books about music. The next book I need to read in 2025 is this book translated from the Swedish. It's called Les filles du chasseur d'ours, which would translate in English to The Daughters of the Bear Hunter. It's from Anneli Jordal and the translator is Anna Gibson. It's the story of a group of 7 sisters who live in the forest with their father, except one day their father doesn't come back home and so they need to survive by themselves. So it's their story. It's quite a thick story, but I'm also keen to get more into Swedish literature. I think this one is too advanced for me to read in Swedish, but I kind of like those dystopian stories set in forests. I really enjoyed Into the Forest by Jean Hagland, for example. I'm not sure this is dystopian, but it has this kind of catastrophic vibe, at least from the blurb on the back. So I'm very intrigued and quite curious to read it. And then the final book in my literary fiction category is Hello Beautiful by Anne Napolitano. I think this book was quite popular this year and I'm very curious to give it a try, not because of the hype, but the blurb intrigued me quite a bit. It's the story of 4 sisters and one of them meets a guy, falls in love, and that kind of wrecks her relationship with her sisters from what I understand, or at least it changes and shifts the dynamics between them. I love to read stories about sisters, and so that's the main thing that drew me to it. For some reason, the blurb makes me think of Little Women, and maybe I'm completely imagining it and there is nothing of that book in this one, but that's what it made me think of. So I don't know. I'm just curious and I really want to get to it. It's been on my TBR for far too long, so I need to get to it in 2025. Okay, moving on to the last and biggest category, which is fantasy and science fiction. The first book on my list is The Mountain in the Sea by Ray Naylor. This is the story of a scientist who goes to an isolated island to study an alien species of octopus. That's pretty much all I know. It sounds so intriguing. I think this classifies as sci-fi, but they got me at octopus. I just want to read this. I think it sounds so intriguing, and I think octopuses are so interesting and fascinating creatures, so I definitely want to read this. Then I have a few French fantasy and sci-fi, which I'm very excited about because my impression is that it's not a huge genre in France. It's still quite limited and most of the books that are published are translations from the English. So I'm very excited to read French authors in that category. The first one is Claire Garand with Paideia. This is a debut novel and it tells the story of 10 young girls who are orbiting around Earth. And they represent the future of humanity. They're supposed to bear the future children that will help humanity survive. It sounds very intriguing. I think the blurb doesn't give out a lot, but this book really has a pull on me for some reason. I can't really explain it, but there is something so intriguing about this book that I really want to read it. And it was not even on my radar when I purchased it. I just spotted it in the shop window and was immediately drawn to it. So I really hope it lives up to my, I can't even say expectations because I don't really know what to expect, but I really hope that it's gonna be a book that I love. And again, I hope it lives up to that, at least anticipation. The next one is Nous by Christelle Dabos. It's the second book from Christelle Dabos on this list, and it is a dystopia, I believe. Christelle Dabos, as I said, is the author of the Mirror Visitor series, which is the first tome is one of my favorite books of all time. So I'm very curious to see what she came up with next. I think it's gonna be quite a different style, just the fact that it's referred to as a dystopia, but I think it's gonna be good. If it's just half as good as The Winter's Promise, then I'll be happy. So we'll see what this is like. And then the third book is a pure fantasy book. It's Le Chant des Cavalières by Jeanne-Marie Corrèze. That would be the Song of the Writers. And I don't know much about the plot of this book. I think the blurb is quite short and doesn't give away much. But this sounds like more high fantasy kind of novel. And it seems very female-centered as well, which I'm quite curious and happy about. So we will see how this one fares in my 2025 list. The next one is The Fifth Season by A.K. Jemisin, which is a blend of fantasy and sci-fi as far as I understand it. I've heard so many good things about this book. I also did N.K. Jemisin's writing class from Masterclass on fantasy and science fiction, and it was very good. I have very high hopes for this one. And I don't even know how to summarize the plot, but I think it's well known enough that either you're familiar with it or you will have no problem finding a summary. Next is Six of Crows by Leigh Bardugo, and this would be my first Leigh Bardugo ever, and I'm very excited about it. It's a YA fantasy heist novel, which what else do you need? That just sounds super fun. So yeah, I want to get along on this ride. That sounds amazing. The next one is Wool by Hugh Howey, and this is a science fiction in which people live in a big silo underground because something bad happened to the planet. And so apparently the society has quite strict rules, and if you don't follow those rules, you're going to be cast out outside to fare for yourself. This was recommended to me by one of my best friends, and it's one of her favorite books. She speaks very highly of this, so I don't need to know much. I trust her judgment. I'm really keen to give it a try. And then the final book on my 2025 list is The Phoenix Keeper by S.A. MacLean. This seems to be a cozy, gentle kind of fantasy novel set in a zoo of magical creature, and it centers around a enemies to lover kind of plot. I don't know much more than this. The edition is gorgeous. I'm just looking forward to reading this. So those were the 25 books from my physical TBR that I need to read in 2025. I have one more book that I absolutely need to read next year, but it's not on my physical TBR because it's not out yet. And this book is in Swedish. It's called Lika Barn, and it's from my friend Ildiko Fritz. It's coming out at the end of March, and I'm just so excited for her, and I'm so excited to be reading her book. So I had to mention it because it's definitely going to be one exception to my no-buy plans. I'm definitely getting this book. I want it signed, and yeah, I'm so excited for it. So that's it for today. I hope you enjoyed this video, and as always, thank you so much for watching. It means a lot, and I hope to see you in the next one. Bye bye.